Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist, Learn Languages, Make a Difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today we're going to discuss how to decolonize the modern foreign language curriculum. And the first step is to dismantle the logic and legacies of colonialism, in which the very label modern foreign language is still deeply rooted. Stay tuned. So think about this. Modern foreign languages. Each of these terms participates from coloniality, that is to say, from the logics and legacies of colonialism, and as such, they are unhelpful when it comes to decolonizing the curriculum. For in the words of Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. So first off, the label modern. We need to understand that colonialism is not an accident, an anecdote of modernity, but it's part and parcel of it, so that there wouldn't be modernity without colonialism and vice versa. Now, within that framework, linguistics is a disciplinary manifestation of the advent of the modern bourgeois colonial nation state in Europe. It's created in that particular historical context. It follows from that decolonial linguistics finds its starting point in the link, in the connection between language on the one hand and that mutually constitutive relationship between colonialism and modernity on the other. There are a couple of interesting sources that you can check out on this, the first of which is Linguistics and Colonialism, originally written in French by Louis-Jean Calvet, and then the recent volume Colonial and Decolonial Linguistics. I'll put the links in the description down below so you can check them out at the end of this video. Now, there's a common objection I often encounter when I critique the idea of modernity as being intractably linked with colonialism. Some people say, well, the label modern is just by opposition to the label ancient, meaning the Latin and Greek languages. But we need to understand that neither the label modern nor that of ancient fall from the sky or operate in a vacuum. Rather, and contrary to the naturalization that they have undergone in our society, these labels were created in a very specific time with a very specific political purpose in mind. The rhetoric of modernity is rooted in the colonization of time and space during the European Renaissance and its subsequent universalization across the globe. So the colonization of time in particular included the invention of antiquity as encompassing Greece and Rome and the Middle Ages, situating the Renaissance in the present time, meaning the Western Christian time. So modernity is far from an objective, neutral, innocuous category. It follows from the above that modern and ancient are not objective but ideological labels that operate as part of the European project of colonial modernity beginning in 1492. So what are the consequences of speaking of quote-unquote modern languages? Well, in practice, modern languages just refers to the 6 major European languages deemed quote-unquote global in their scope because of the respective empire projects they serve. English, the French, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the German, and the Italian projects of colonialism. So, in the words of Walter Mignolo, modern and colonial racism, that is, the logic of racialization that emerged in the 16th century, has one single purpose: to rank as inferior all languages beyond Greek and Latin and the 6 modern European languages from the domain of sustainable knowledge, and to maintain the enunciative privilege of the Renaissance and Enlightenment European institutions, men, and categories of thought. As a result of this, in practice, students do not get access to languages that are otherwise widely spoken in our contemporary world, i.e. perfectly modern in the strict sense of the term, but they're not European/imperial enough to be considered global. And here's Dr. Ruth illustrating this point.
I question the extent to which modern is a useful term to have in the title of a degree or of a school. The modern is such a slippery term to the extent that it comes to be a bit meaningless unless situated very precisely. The real issue is which languages we teach. And modern languages as a discipline, as it's developed in the UK, has predominantly focused on Western European languages. As it grew through the 19th century and the early 20th century, learning languages was a way of improving cultural cooperation. So you get a big investment in language learning after the First World War, for example, and with the growing importance of the European project. And what that means is that we end up with a set of languages which are global in their scope because of the project of empire and the way in which languages such as French or Spanish were exported. But it means that students don't have access to languages which are very widely spoken here in the UK because they don't fit historically into what modern languages has been. So you get African languages, for example, only being taught really at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. So I think that we could really think more in a much more concerted way about introducing languages, non-European languages, into the curriculum. Here in Bristol, we do teach Arabic, Korean and Mandarin, but these are not full degree courses. So you take a unit, learning Arabic from scratch, for example, but it's not a full degree course with all of the cultural apparatus and cultural historical units surrounding it. So there have been for a long time, for decades really, there have been initiatives in what are sometimes called community languages or heritage languages. It's a big project up in Manchester, the Multilingual Manchester project, which is about embedding those languages in the university curriculum. Here in Bristol, we have a very large Somali population. So, imagine a university where we were teaching Somali to students, say, from the medical school. What would that give them in terms of skills when they were then going out and working for the NHS? So I think that that's a really interesting way that we can decolonise modern languages. And my own teaching is in African literature, in French. So I'm interested in how we can, using these hegemonic European languages and within the confines of a degree in French, we can also pull them apart so we can start to challenge this narrow methodological nationalism, which has dominated modern languages departments. So through introducing, say, the teaching of the Haitian Revolution to the first year students, we teach the Haitian Revolution alongside the French Revolution. And we ask students to challenge ideas of freedom or ideals of freedom and equality that are put forward during the period of the French Revolution through the lens of the Haitian Revolution and through the lens of 20th century writers such as Aimé Césaire and C.L.R. James and what they write about the Haitian Revolution. So I often give my students a film in Wolof, which is the lingua franca of Senegal, even though they're studying a unit in what is supposedly francophone African literature. I will always put that on the curriculum because it immediately challenges francophone Africa as itself being a colonial construct.
Now, what about the term foreign? First, a foreign language is a language not commonly spoken in the country of the speaker. However, the association between language and nationality is contingent, vague, and pernicious. First, despite the popular culture tendency to map languages onto national boundaries, languages and national boundaries do not lend themselves to accurate categorizations. Second, the label foreign language assumes an absolute binary between national on the one hand and alien or foreign on the other. This dichotomy resonates with xenophobic, nativist, nationalist, and colonialist ideologies and projects. Consider, for instance, the recent claim by language program director Rey Agudo apropos the use of the label foreign language in the US. He says, to the extent that language also functions as an oral marker of difference, particularly race, tagging other languages as foreign takes on insidious connotations ranging from discrimination to outright hate. The last 5 or 6 years have seen an increase in hate crimes and hate incidents inspired by ethno-nationalist sentiment, from verbal and physical attacks on Spanish speakers to the recent episodes of anti-Asian violence. These attacks victimize those who look and sound different from a nativist fantasy. And last but not least, the very category of language. Well, language is arguably a product of colonial and neoliberal rationality. So let's think, for instance, about the difference between a language on the one hand and a dialect on the other. In the volume that I just showed, authored by Calvet, Linguistics and Colonialism, Calvet explains that distinction between language and dialect is a binary that is characteristic of the way in which linguistics served historically to further the purpose of colonialism. So the colonizers will deem their own language as a language, and the language of the colonized as a dialect by opposition. So in practice, the difference between language and dialect is not just linguistic, it is over-determined by extra-linguistic factors, meaning political and social issues. Think, for instance, about the case of Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian. Are they the same language or different languages? Well, it depends on who you ask and in what historical context. And the second point is that languages are not autonomous, discrete entities that can be easily quantified. It's hard to tell when a language starts and when a different language ends. There's a language continuum, so the idea that languages are self-contained is an abstraction and idealization that does not reflect the linguistic reality on the ground. So at the end of the day, modern foreign languages are actually North Atlantic abstract universalizations, or as some authors have called them, named languages, meaning socio-political constructs which do not exist outside the discursive ontology. They are all invented in that sense, rather than pre-existing. All there is on the ground are pre-taxonomical acts of world languaging, meaning complex local practices of linguistic interaction as dynamically enacted by human beings. So in conclusion, if we are to decolonize the so-called modern foreign languages curriculum, the first step ought to be the dismantling of that very label, which is, as I've shown in this presentation, very complicit with colonial linguistics, which is what we're trying to dismantle in the first place. So now that we have identified the problem, this begs the question of, well, what are the alternatives to this? How would you call that curriculum if you don't call it modern foreign languages curriculum? Well, I suggest world languaging curriculum. World implies the ideal that no linguistic variety is dominant and no linguistic variety is alien either. And on top of that, languaging more accurately reflects the reality on the ground in the sense that all there are interactions mediated through language rather than pre-existing self-contained autonomous linguistic entities we call languages. Do you agree with this label? Do you disagree? And if you do disagree, let me know why and what alternative designation do you suggest. So that was all from me. Thank you so much for watching the entire video. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns down below. And as always, thanks for watching.